Welcome to School of PE podcast. I'm your host, Chris Miller, and I'm so glad that you could join me this week. We are going to discuss topics about FE, PE, and SC, and we're also going to answer questions that will help students prepare for their exams. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the School of PE SOPE weekly podcast. I'm Chris Miller. We have a special guest here today, Mr. Justin Goolsby. And today, before we introduce him, we're going to have an interesting topic. We're going to talk about the importance of teachers and advisors, helping students recognize their skills and strengths. So let's please welcome Justin. Justin, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So before we can dive into the meat and potatoes, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Justin Goolsby. I'm married. I have 2 kids, and my wife is recently staying home, so it's been fun working from home, seeing the family every day. So just enjoying life right now.
That sounds good, Justin. I think we're going to have a good time today, and we have an interesting topic. Not only applies, specifically in engineering, but I think anyone can relate to this topic, whether it's a high school or college, or maybe someone that's, been outside of school for a while and can maybe translate teachers and advisors to maybe colleagues or mentors. So, I think education over the last couple of years have kind of taken a turn. I mean, a lot has changed, right? COVID kind of knocked the world on its socks or off of its feet. And especially in education, where the traditional school model has been just kind of smacked around a little bit, both from the student side, teacher side, what used to be a fairly stable model or a familiar model has now gone a lot of it online, hybrid. So, I've seen over the last couple of years, students kind of trying to gain their traction as well as on teachers. Hats off to everybody that's been part of this. It's been a challenge, but, through this, I think it's going to become even a stronger model than what it was before. So, when I was growing up, you thought of teachers as not just somebody that, taught you the lesson plan for the day, but someone that you could kind of look to as a role model. A familiar face that you saw every day and somewhat of a guiding light. So let me ask you this question, Justin. In what ways can teachers and advisors influence students?
Yeah, I think whenever I was younger, as a student, especially in high school or freshman year in college, I probably didn't appreciate it as much as I should have at the time. And I didn't really learn about the value of that until probably sophomore or junior year in college. But, they really have an impact. And even with small things, even if it's coming down to just humbling you, because I know for me personally, coming out of high school in a kind of a rural town of, being top 10 students, you kind of think that you're smarter than everybody else until you go to a university and everybody is just as smart or smarter than you. So just getting in touch with a good advisor or a teacher and, letting them kind of, explain to you how the system works. And even though you're taking 15 hours, it takes more than 15 hours to do those 15 hours of load. So, just helping you carve a path, what are your interests? I know originally for me personally, I did not want to go the particular route I went, but after talking to several advisors and kind of learning what my different interests are, it kind of helped create a path for me. So,
Well, thank you for sharing that. So, and it's funny, I agree with you. Sometimes it's not that a teacher, is making you better at mathematics or biology, but sometimes you just need to be humbled.
Yeah.
And, and oftentimes, like I had a friend of mine who I went to high school with, and he was a running back, and he ran circles around every single, school that we played. So, he got out of high school thinking, I got, I'm the best there is. And then he went to the University of Washington, a big Pac-12 school, and boy, was he humbled quickly. Coaches tell him, look, everyone on this team is almost like you, more or less, right? So, humbling is good. I think sometimes what it does, it helps you refine your roots. And, oftentimes people come out much better from a humbling experience.
Yes.
Teachers can do a lot of things, right? They can guide you. They can, be there for a shoulder for you to lean on. But also, you may have, and you might even remember this too, that was there a teacher, whether it's, K through college, that you were like, man, this teacher is just really, really hard on me?
Yes. So I remember, let's see, I was probably a junior in college, and I was taking a dynamics class, and a professor I had was very difficult in class. Came and he always had, suit on, a very, this is a very serious course. But then, well, so then he liked to pick on students intentionally. So he would call you out. He had the roster there, and he would have a very difficult problem on the board that he knew that nobody knew how to work out. And so you're just sitting there, just praying that he does not call on you. And sure enough, he'd call on you, and it'd be embarrassing. But as much as I tried to avoid that professor, one day I kind of ran into him in passing. When I joined the Civil Honor Society, and he was at an event that we were doing, and ran into him, got a chance to introduce myself more formally, and we actually hit it off pretty good. And so after that, I kind of understood his personality more and kind of what he expected from his students. And it's actually pretty funny. Throughout the semester, he started kind of giving me a little bit more easier problems to work on the board, so it wasn't so embarrassing. And at the end of the semester, I think it really paid off when it comes down to, grading large projects or final exams where everyone's struggling. It just kind of helps knowing that you have a history, and he can kind of, help you on the curve if needed.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And, oftentimes when you have a teacher that's hard on you, you think it's because they don't like you.
Mhm.
But I'll take you all the way back to the early 90s. I'm older than you. So back in, I think it was 1980, I was a freshman in high school. I was going to school in a city called Lompoc, and I had a history teacher named Mr. Monsieur. We used to call him Mr. Monster because he was tough. And man, he rode me every single day. I'm like, this guy's got to hate me. And then I remember it was the Friday of Christmas break, and I was, dating this girl, and I went over her house, and her mom's boyfriend, I was like, holy cow. I said, that's Mr. Monsieur, the history teacher. So I was like, oh, this is going to be a long night. But you know what? Sat there talking to him about the Lakers and all that. And I was like, man, he's a regular guy. So he asked me, he goes, I bet you're wondering why I'm so hard on you in class. I say, yeah, I figured it's because you didn't like me. He's like, no, he's like, because I know that you can achieve better things. So by pushing you and being on you, then, I think, teachers are trying to maybe pull that inner strength out of you and guide you. But we often mistake it as, oh my goodness, this teacher has it in for me. He's a meanie.
Yeah.
But oftentimes I think they're just trying to get you to that next level. So
Right.
the story is
Mhm.
pretty cool. As you're working your way through college and you're going from teacher to teacher, class to class, any special tools or tactics that you saw professors do stand out?
Well, so I had some professors that are definitely more personable than others. I know for sure I had one that uh, made it pretty clear that he did not like freshmen or undergraduates. He felt like they would all fail out, and it was a waste of their time. But most of them, I found that were very inviting to their office. They'd stick around after class, and if you wanted to chat with them for a while and just kind of get to know them personally, they're more than welcoming. I had several that were like that, where they would stick around for 5 or 10 minutes after class and just really make an effort to get to know the students. And so, but I think as I went on in college, trying to make that effort to go to their office hours, um, even if I didn't necessarily need help with anything or had a serious question, just stopping by, letting them know that, hey, you're thinking about their subject, and just kind of chit chatting with them and talking to them a little bit about, a little bit of everything. And I think it just helps in the long run. They remember who you are. You understand what they are looking for in class. It really helps with studying. I think of the biggest part with college is just not knowing what to study. It seems like it can just be kind of a shot in the dark. And
Hmm.
so the more you get to know your professor and how their mind works, you can kind of understand what ideas are important to them,
Hmm.
and kind of make a pretty educated guess on what's going to be on the exam if you need to study. Now, probably won't ever tell you what's going to be on the exam, but you can usually feel it out. It will save you some time in the long run, I think, making those investments with your professors. But yeah, I think there were, most professors wanted to be there for the student, but it was because it's a two-way relationship. So, they are going to be there to make an effort, but you have to be making an effort as well.
No, that's some great advice. And, if you think about it, let's say you're a freshman on a big school, like let's say Ohio State, and you're sitting in your, stats 145, intro to statistics, right? You might be in a class of like 400 people, right? And that's just one session.
Right.
So imagine this professor's teaching 3 sessions. So now he has 1,200 students. So yeah, how do you think you're going to be recognized, right? If you don't make those efforts to go by the office, and like you said, you don't need to have a question, or you don't need to have help. Just going in there and, like you said, letting them know that, hey, I am in your class. I'm trying. I think that goes a long way. Not like they're going to be like, hey, this is what here's the exam the night before. But I remember when I was taking an art history class at Ohio State, and I was only taking it because it was a prereq. I used to go by the professor's office probably twice a week just to chat or whatever. And sure enough, you're right. They maybe you're on the border or something of an A or B or something, or maybe they'll let some loose hints loose because you put in, they see that you put in the effort, and they can put a name to a face, which I think is important. So Justin, I think that's some pretty good advice. We've talked about the positive ways that, instructors and advisors can influence students, but I mean, can you think of maybe can instructors or teachers and advisors have a negative effect on students?
Yeah, so I have one teacher in mind. I don't think I'll ever forget. It was a negative impact where I was in high school, and it was a engineering kind of track, I guess you could say. Is I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called Project Lead the Way, but I don't know if it's even still around. But so the teacher at the time, we were doing some sort of project, and it was me and a friend that we were working on this, and he tells me for some reason, he says, I don't think you're going to cut it in engineering. And if you do make it, your friend's probably going to be your boss. And I was like, well, that's a weird thing to say. Well, I mean, he ended up being completely wrong. My friend didn't make it in engineering, and I did, but so I don't know if it negatively stood out to me, but maybe it had some motivation of proving him wrong. So I think being young, it can probably affect self-esteem a little bit, but I think trying not to dwell on the negative so much and just trying to focus on what your goals are. And, and if you can prove them wrong, it's an added bonus, but I don't think that we can go through life and, out of spite of somebody. So I probably will never see him again. So it doesn't really matter in the long run, but I think when you're in a position of mentorship in any sort of way, even at work, I have a group of guys that I'm leading, and just trying to be an example. I think everything we have to do needs to be intentional, whether or not your upper management or just kind of a mentor for the new guy, just setting that good example on expectations and a good culture. I think it just kind of goes all the way throughout life, really.
No, I agree. I like the fact that you took a negative and you turned it around, right? Hey, it could be a motivational factor. You could take it and say, oh, wait, this guy thinks I'm going to fail. Let me prove him wrong. So I liked how you try to see the positive and everything. So, at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about how over the last couple of years, we've seen education change, and most, COVID, again, changed the world for just about everything, but, maybe most noticeably education. And it used to be where, you go to school every day, especially in your lower grades, you see the same teacher every day, right? You have one teacher every single day. And then as you move through middle school and high school, you have maybe 6 or 7 teachers, but yet you're still building these relationships with these teachers because you're with them for, half of a year, right? So how do you think, or maybe did COVID affect the relationships that students and teachers have?
I think it has to. Really, I think it'd be very difficult to build a new relationship virtually. Not that you can't do it, but it takes a lot more effort, I think, to to make that connection. Personally, you can see people's body language a little bit easier. If you're walking in somebody at a hard time, you can kind of tell by their body language that, okay, I need to get out of here. So scheduling virtual meetings, it's a little bit easier for someone to just hit the cancel button without really seeing your your reactions. So it definitely, I think, is tougher in those regards, but it's also it makes some things simpler because you can fit more things in a time period. So you're not having to walk around campus from office to office. You can schedule different virtual events a little bit quicker. So I think building a strong relationship would be hard, just because you're not physically there interacting and doing events that kind of build those relationships together. But there are some positives from that too. I think that because there is more flexibility in scheduling when it's online. They're not just only in their office for an hour a day that you have to make it work that day, or adjust your schedule. So there's pros and cons. I think it probably is going to be a big learning curve for a lot of people, especially people who aren't naturally outgoing anyway, to kind of make those calls. I mean, I know a lot of times, being a part of a younger generation, I know a lot of my, I guess, people in my generation typically have a harder time talking on the phone or, so I can understand that people might think it's awkward with a virtual call or a phone call or whatever, than it is just bumping into somebody physically. So I think it's just those barriers that people are just going to have to learn to knock back down, kind of like how, it was done before texting.
I agree with you. I mean, it's funny how people can go days without physically picking up the phone to talk to a friend, but yet they've probably sent 1,000 text messages.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun to see how the picking up the phone is died down. But I do agree, virtually, yeah, you can have the meetings and things like that, but you're right, it's sometimes a little harder to read the body language because cameras maybe not always on. But also, you don't know what that person's doing during the meeting. They could be working on another thing. I mean, I'm guilty of it. Like, I have these team meetings and I'll be working on another screen, and you might be not as focused as you would be if you were in person. So let me ask you this question. How would you assess skills virtually?
Yeah, that's tough. So my experience with virtual has just been through work nowadays. So I didn't go to school virtually. So, so for me, whenever we hire a new person, I will try to, through Microsoft Teams, we'll share our screen, and if I just let them watch me work for a few days, they can just kind of shadow me, see how things are done. So that's probably going to be, from a working environment, might be the most practical training method, is just let them watch you do it. It's less awkward than having somebody stand over your shoulder.
That's true.
So, so that's actually a benefit, I think, in that case, where maybe some training could be a little bit more streamlined in that regard. But I think, well, I think
Tough
I got
question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you hit it on the head when you said, one way you can do is job shadowing is a pretty big part of the new person's, I'm going to say, curriculum, right? You shadow the person around for the first day, but you're right. I mean, you share a screen, you can kind of share job shadow that way. You're right. I think it's a little less awkward than having someone follow you around step for step.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's difficult to assess, somebody's maybe prowess on something virtually because you're not sharing the same physical space. So it might be a little difficult to sense the true, I guess, body emotions that they're
right.
they're
Yeah. On the office, especially whenever we were all together, you could tell how long somebody's been working on something. And so that obviously is a sign that they're struggling. Same with school. I think, if you're, Okay, so like I remember freshman year. So you go to recitation class
Mhm.
where the TA is probably talking about material that maybe the professor talked about the previous week. You're taking a quiz. Um, so with in that type of environment where there's maybe only a few dozen people in there, it's easy to tell if somebody's stumped or not, even if they want to admit it. Because a lot of people get embarrassed,
Mhm.
they want to admit it. So if the person is really watching for body language, they can kind of walk around and see, okay, how's this person doing? Or you could just ask a neighbor. Um, whereas if you don't have a good network yet, if you're a new student and you haven't built up that friend group or whoever, it might be hard to find somebody who could help you out if the professors are busy. So being in those physical environments, it's easy to kind of, hey, um, I'm struggling with this. Do you know what's going on here? So
No,
yeah.
completely understand. It's difficult, right? I mean, the virtual is becoming the norm. But let's say you just finished eighth grade, right?
Mhm.
You're transitioning from middle school to high school, and all of a sudden you find out during that summer that school's remote. You're going virtual for your whole freshman year. So, I mean, schools, they have hundreds of students, right?
Mhm.
And so, how would it be? And also, becoming a freshman now, you have maybe 6 or 7 teachers that you have to engage with. So, I mean, what can teachers and students do to kind of overcome this barrier and still build relationships, even though they're not going to see each other every day? Because, let's say, you're in class after class one day, a teacher could pull you aside and say, "Hey, Justin, let's just, have a chat." So they could always pull you aside, or you
Mhm.
could ask, "Hey, do you mind if I stay after class one day?" But when you're in a Zoom of 30, 35 other students, what do you do?
Yeah, that's tough. Especially when you're in a large Zoom call.
Hmm.
I noticed it personally because traditionally before a meeting or after a meeting, you can pull somebody away and have a private conversation.
Hmm.
Where in a large Zoom, you're not going to have those private sidebars. Um, yeah, I think that's going to be. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, they both have their pros and cons. I think being there physically is always going to be an advantage.
Right.
Just because some things you can't replace, but I mean, I think you can come close, but some things you just can't replace. But yeah, measuring skills, on a piece of paper, you can see how somebody worked out a problem. And you
Right.
can say, okay, they messed up here. I can address this virtually. I'm sure that they have, methods that are similar, but it's probably harder for somebody to write down step by step on an electronic board.
Hmm.
It may not come out as cleanly. Um, you know, Building those relationships on a large Zoom call with 30 people, you know, chat is only good for for so long. It's hard to read context in a few words. I think we all are guilty of misreading a text message.
Oh yeah.
So I think those types of elements are going to be really hard to duplicate virtually. And I think that if anybody is in a situation where they can do something physically, I would say to take that route just because it's probably going to be better long term. But if you're kind of stuck with the virtual because of different restrictions and things, um, I think you just got to realize that this is not going to be the same, same level
Hmm.
necessarily as an in-person student-teacher relationship. So you kind of have to figure out creative methods to kind of bridge that gap and maybe work with your teacher to see what their schedule is like and how you can have almost like maybe a small group of your students, maybe if you're all struggling with the same thing, have a small tutoring off to the side until
Hmm.
we can kind of build that relationship with those people and your teacher to just kind of coming up with those different ideas.
No, and they're all great ideas you mentioned, and you brought up an interesting thing is, we all text, we all send emails, WhatsApp, whatever it is, and written communication can be very effective, but sometimes you can misinterpret
Mm-hmm.
what is being said or maybe misunderstand, but also you don't have the ability to sense emotion as much, right? Like if I'm talking to you and we're face to face, you can sense if I'm upset or maybe I'm sad. But in an email, let's say I accidentally left the caps lock down and I send you an email, you're like, holy cow, this guy's
Right.
yelling at me. But in actuality, I just accidentally hit the key. So, I mean, I think, yeah, I think face-to-face is important. People are doing the best that they can now. We're learning that we are able to function at a high level virtually.
Yeah.
There are jobs that I used to think that if you weren't in person or in an office, they weren't possible. But I mean, just about every job has been taken remote in some aspect. So yeah, I think it's just a learning curve. But again, I do think that face to face and in person makes building those relationships, especially at the beginning, a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing is that beginning, the hurdle of the beginning. Because once you have those established relationships, you can overcome them, I think, with moderate effort. Uh, you know, Back whenever we were all working at the office physically full time, I would go to our district office and probably once every few weeks, and just kind of go from cube to cube to say, hey, how's it going? Just kind of maintaining those relationships
Mhm.
where, now we've been home for 2 years and I don't even know who's there and who's not anymore. People have come and gone and it's hard to even know who's around, so it's very difficult to maintain relationships when you're only virtual and you don't know who's coming and going.
No, I agree. It's funny you just said something. I'm like, holy cow! I think you're right. It's been 2 years. I mean, it's funny. I talked to some of our clients, our corporate clients, and they're like, "Yeah, we haven't been in the office since like spring of 2020." I'm like, "Holy cow!" She's like, "Yeah, it feels so weird because some people have come and gone. You
Mhm.
haven't seen these people except I mean, because not everyone uses a camera when they're on Teams meetings or
Right,
anything.
right.
So yeah, it's like I don't even know what this person's like anymore. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how when this all ends, if people remain virtual or they do a hybrid. But just as we're getting ready to wrap things up, we've covered a lot of interesting things. We've talked about how teachers and advisors can help guide your way, maybe when you're a little bit, maybe you don't have a path, you don't know which path to go down, or maybe you're stuck.
Mhm.
So if you're going to think back to your college or high school days, is there any one person that stands out, or maybe what they told you that has just stuck with you and
Yeah, so
help you keep going?
it kind of ropes into a little story.
Sure.
So like I mentioned earlier, in high school, I did very well, and so I came into college very, I guess, prideful in education, and I did a lot of sports in high school too. So I figured going into freshman year, I'm not doing sports anymore, so I've got extra time, and so I'm going to load up. I'm going to take as many classes as possible because I've got the time to do it. And hey, it says it's 18 hours, so it must mean I'm only going to do 18 hours of workload. And school in high school was a 40-hour week, so that's really half the time. So it should be fine. And so I took all these. I signed up for all these very difficult classes, trying to knock them all out. And so summer before freshman year, we were going into the new student conference, and this old professor, he was a very nice old man, and he pulls me aside. He's like, "Hey, Justin, I'm sure that you're a bright young man, but this course load that you have here is it's just not physically possible. I don't. It doesn't really matter how smart you are. There's not enough time in the week to be able to do all this. You have 3 labs and all these classes, and it's just there's just not enough time." It's like, I don't think this guy understands who I am. It's kind of my mentality. And like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll drop the history, but I'm going to keep all the other classes. And so I signed up for, Cal 2, chemistry, physics. They all have their own labs, programming, and everything else. And so I went ahead, charging along doing that. And it hit me pretty hard freshman year, first semester. I did not realize how to study properly. Um, and things weren't going very well, to be honest. And so I I really had to kind of look myself in the mirror and say, all right, maybe this guy was onto something here, here, and I really need to learn how to study and learn what my limits are. And so from that moment on, the next semester, freshman year in the spring, I said, all right, I'm going to take 12 hours. I'm going to cut it down. I'm going to retake some classes I didn't do so well in. I'm going to figure out how to study. My goal this semester is to figure out how to study first, and not just survive. I'm going to do well. I'm going to do it right. And so that semester was very successful. I made all A's, but so the main takeaway I got from that semester, it always stuck with me. And I always tell everybody I know going in, especially in engineering, is that first semester is going to be a lot different what you think it's going to be. I know you're probably a smart guy or girl, and just I recommend taking 12 hours. Take it easy, learn what it's like, and then if you think you got it from there, go forward. But it's always better to start slow and then crank it up than it is to get yourself in too deep.
That's some great advice, Justin. I think it's a path that I think a lot of people have gone down. I mean, if you think about it, when you get to college, it's your first time maybe being away from home if you're not going to a local college. So no one there to wake you up every morning to tell you to go to class. Mm-hmm. Professors don't care if you come to class because you're paying a tuition.
Right.
But also learning to study when you don't have your parents telling you, hey, there's no TV tonight till you do homework, is a whole new world. So like you said, you had to learn how to study, but it isn't even that. Like I found the same trap. I was like, okay, I go to school Monday through Friday, like 8 to 2, right? Usually in high school. Yeah. And now you're telling me I only have to take 12 hours of class? Come on. But those 12 hours, if you think about it, you're probably for every hour you're in class, you're probably studying 2 hours or maybe 3 hours.
Right.
But it's not just about how many classes you take, it's the mixture of the courses that you register for.
Yes.
There's some things that you shouldn't do. You should not take 3 lab classes along with anything else in the same semester. So right. I think you've given some very valuable advice to anybody that's, entering college that, it is easier, like you said, to pick up speed, because let's say you took those 18 hours and let's say you ended up with just below, well, we'll give you a 2.0 for that semester, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that next semester you realize, okay, I'm going to manage my course load, maybe have a better strategy when it comes to picking courses. But now, instead of working from a 4.0 and trying to maintain it, you're now starting from a 2.0 and trying to increase it. So you're doing more harm than good, I think, because now you're not only having to maybe retake some classes, but you're trying to have to erase what what you did to yourself in the first semester. So
yes.
Very good advice. I appreciate you sharing the story. I know we didn't get through everything today, Justin, so I'd love to have you back.
Sure.
I think today was a great topic. And again, it's not just for engineers. I think anybody that's a student of, education or just someone that's entering in the workforce can learn a lot that, building relationships is really important. Sometimes things aren't as easy as you may have thought they were going to be, like going from a high school where you're in the top 10% of your graduating class, and then you're going into a big university where you're amongst many big fish.
Yeah.
And humbleization or being humble is important. And I think you had a great story about that, right? You went in with a very super high confidence level and you were humbled, but you didn't let that stop you, right? I mean, you achieved it. I'm talking to an engineer today. So, I mean, you did something right. So you kept on fighting through. So Justin, I appreciate you coming out. For everybody that tuned in today, have a great rest of the week. Justin, thank you again for coming out, and love to see you back here for another episode.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Justin.